My starting point when it comes to the consideration of any issue relating to free speech is my passionate belief that the second most precious thing in life is the right to express yourself freely.
This old clip from Rowan Atkinson is absolutely fantastic, and I think all of you need to listen to this to understand why it is so important that we fight for our freedoms in these scary, dark times where Keir Starmer is trying to turn Britain into something out of 1984. If you lose your freedoms, you won't be getting them back. So we need to fight for this now. And you need to listen to this clip to really understand why it is so important that we protect our freedoms and why the answer to rioting and to people hurling insults at each other is not to clamp down on free speech, and why in fact that will make matters worse. This video is from 2012. It's an old one from an old campaign he was working on, but this is really relevant right now. Take a listen.
The most precious thing in life, I think, is food in your mouth. And the third most precious is a roof over your head. But a fixture for me in the number 2 slot is free expression, just below the need to sustain life itself. That is because I have enjoyed free expression in this country all my professional life and fully expect to continue to do so. Personally, I suspect highly unlikely to be arrested for whatever laws exist to contain free expression because of the undoubtedly privileged position that is afforded to those of a high public profile. So my concerns are less for myself and more for those more vulnerable because of their lower profile. Like the man arrested in Oxford for calling a police horse gay, or the teenager arrested for calling the Church of Scientology a cult, or the cafe owner arrested for displaying passages from the Bible on a TV screen. When I heard of some of these more ludicrous offences and charges, I remembered that I had been here before in a fictional context.
It is genuinely insane that people were arrested for those things.
I once did a show called Not the 9 O'Clock News some years ago, and we did a sketch where Griff Rhys-Jones played Constable Savage, a manifestly racist police officer to whom I, as his station commander, is giving a dressing down for arresting a black man on a whole string of ridiculous, trumped up and ludicrous charges. The charges for which Constable Savage arrested Mr. Winston Kadogo of 55 Mercer Road were these: walking on the cracks in the pavement, walking in a loud shirt in a built-up area during the hours of darkness, and one of my favourites, walking around all over the place. He was also arrested for urinating in a public convenience and looking at me in a funny way. Who would have thought that we would end up with a law that would allow life to imitate art so exactly? I read somewhere a defender of the status quo claiming that the fact that the gay horse case was dropped after the arrested man refused to pay the fine, and that the Scientology case was also dropped at some point during the court process, was proof that the law was working well, ignoring the fact that the only reason these cases were dropped was because of the publicity that they had attracted. The police sensed that ridicule was just around the corner and withdrew their actions. But what about the thousands of other cases that did not enjoy the oxygen of publicity, that weren't quite ludicrous enough to attract media attention? Even for those actions that were withdrawn, people were arrested, questioned, taken to court, and then released. You know, that isn't a law working properly.
This is a really good point, actually, that it is the cases that get publicity that may end up being dropped. Whereas when you haven't got any public profile and your case doesn't get picked up by the papers, you can be arrested and charged for absolutely bonkers stuff. And I think that this is a really important point because it highlights the fact that, as far as I can see, our police and our judiciary, their behaviour is very much swayed by what they think the impact will be on their reputation. Look at the Manchester airport incident. Weeks have gone by, and the men who beat the shit out of police officers, including a female police officer, leaving her with a broken nose. We've seen it on the CCTV. The behaviour is absolutely disgusting. They haven't been charged yet. And the police are terrified too, because they're worried about the reputational damage. After, when the first video came out, all of the headlines were saying that this was a racist attack. It was just because of skin colour, which was just absolutely ludicrous and inaccurate. So they are scared to arrest and charge people if they are a person of colour. And you see the same in the courts. This is not the law working properly. This is not a fair, democratic society that we live in if this is how the police and the judiciary operate.
That is censoriousness of the most intimidating kind, guaranteed to have, as Lord Deer says, a chilling effect on free expression and free protest. Parliament's Joint Committee on Human Rights summarised, as you may know, this whole issue very well by saying, while arresting a protester for using threatening or abusive speech may, depending on the circumstances, be a proportionate response, we do not think that language or behaviour that is merely insulting should ever be criminalised in this way. The clear problem with the outlawing of insult is that too many things can be interpreted as such. Criticism is easily construed as insult by certain parties. Ridicule easily construed as insult. Sarcasm, unfavourable comparison, merely stating an alternative point of view to the orthodoxy can be interpreted as insult.
This is the problem with laws around free speech, is because they use vague language like insulting, harmful, hateful, but it's very, very hard for people to define these and be able to define where the line is, where you say that something is speech that should be outlawed and speech that should not be outlawed, when it is so harmful and so harsh that it needs to be an offence. And the vaguity of this is the problem. It means that because it's vague, people don't know what they are allowed to say and not allowed to say, which means that they're scared to say anything. And the other point I want to make is in the online safety bill. Very long document. You can go sit and read it for yourself if you're as nerdy as I am. And here I'm trying to search for what actually constitutes harmful speech that the online safety bill would suggest is illegal. You know what it says? It says it's up to the discretion of the Secretary of State. So whoever is Secretary of State at the time, they can just decide whatever they want for what's harmful. It's just a slippery slope, guys.
And because so many things can be interpreted as insult, it is hardly surprising that so many things have been, as the examples I talked about earlier show. Although the law under discussion has been on the statute book for over 25 years, it is indicative of a culture that has taken hold of the programmes of successive governments, that with the reasonable and well-intentioned ambition to contain obnoxious elements in society, has created a society of an extraordinarily authoritarian and controlling nature. That is what you might call the new intolerance, a new but intense desire to gag uncomfortable voices of dissent. I am not intolerant, say many people, say many softly spoken, highly educated, liberal-minded people. I'm only intolerant of intolerance. And people tend to nod sagely and say, oh yes, wise words, wise words. And yet if you think about this supposedly inarguable statement for longer than 5 seconds, you realise that all it is advocating is the replacement of one kind of intolerance with another, which to me doesn't represent any kind of progress at all. Underlying prejudices, injustices, or resentments are not addressed by arresting people. They are addressed by the issues being aired, argued, and dealt with, preferably outside the legal process.
This is very, very important. The way that you deal with people shouting racist things on the street, people going and attacking migrant hotels and smashing them up, people throwing bricks at police, all these things that you want to stop. Arresting people is just a sticking plaster on the problem. The real solution is allowing people to have a voice again, giving them more speech rather than taking it away.
For me, the best way to increase society's resistance to insulting or offensive speech is to allow a lot more of it. As with childhood diseases, you can better resist those germs to which you have been exposed. We need to build our immunity to taking offence so that we can deal with the issues that perfectly justified criticism can raise. Our priority should be to deal with the message, not the messenger. As President Obama said in an address to the United Nations only a month or so ago, laudable efforts to restrict speech can become a tool to silence critics or oppress minorities.
Keir Starmer is definitely trying to use it as a tool to silence critics, no doubt about it.
The strongest weapon against hateful speech is not repression, it is more speech. And that's the essence of my thesis, more speech. If we want a robust society, we need more robust dialogue, and that must include the right to insult or to offend. And even if, as Lord Dear says, the freedom to be inoffensive is no freedom at all.
This is a very, very beautifully put speech by Rowan Atkinson, where he just lays it out beautifully why free speech is so important. I'm not used to seeing Mr. Bean see it being so eloquent. This was so well put, I couldn't say it better myself. I think it really highlights the importance that we fight for our right to free speech in these scary, scary times where Keir Starmer and his buddies are trying to take it away from us. We cannot back down. We cannot watch one video from the CPS saying that we're going to be in trouble if we retweet footage of riots and then stay silent and don't show to anyone on the internet what is actually going on the streets in these riots. It is very important that we stick together and we keep doing what we are doing, because we have some safety in numbers, and if we lose our right to free speech, you're not going to get it back, trust me. I'm Chloe Dobbs, this has been another video for Reasoned. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and you press the notification bell so you don't miss the next video. I will see you soon.